All right, so I'll go ahead and get started here in a minute or two, and the people will just join in, hop in. We're recording this either way, so I plan to swap this to Twitch probably in the next week or two, but I honestly need to upgrade my setup a little bit before I can do that, which I'll be doing this next week. So,
Is there any
anyways,
reason for that?
what do you mean?
Well, why Twitch over Zoom?
Over what?
Over Zoom. Why Twitch and not Zoom then? Any reason?
Well, I mean, Twitch has automated like VOD recording and management,
Of
that kind of
course, yeah,
stuff,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it
Uh-huh.
just streamlines a lot of it. Your way to disable a new link though. That's fine. We don't let's not change the link right now because it's probably not going to be a mass amount of people today because this is just the first one I'm doing. So it shouldn't be a huge deal. Yeah, if anyone wants to record, feel free. Right. Red's gonna be doing a recording, but it's always good to have more backups. Is that who's Hal? Is that Hagar? Let me post the link on Patreon real quick and then we'll get started. Okay.
They're all coming in now.
What was that?
They're all coming in now.
I got some good stuff planned for today. It'll be fun. All right.
Are you going to post this VOD up as well?
Yeah. I'm gonna be. I have a YouTube and Twitch. I'm gonna be posting these two. Um, that's basically
I
my
know
plan right now.
what is quite good is if you did post it to YouTube, uh, there's nice transcription tools on that,
Yeah, like I'm gonna. I'm
and
gonna
then
need
just
to. I'm
send
gonna need
the
to. I'm
link
gonna need
out.
to. I'm gonna need to go through some of you guys for some of this accessibility stuff, right? Because you're really good at this stuff. I don't really have a lot of experience with that, like you and Red
It's
do,
all
for example.
automatic on
So,
YouTube, so should be
oh, it
fine.
is. Okay, cool. I haven't. I used to do videos a lot on YouTube, like 8 or 9 years ago, but I barely have done anything since then. So I gotta get back into it again. All right, so let's get started here. Cool. Got a lot of people. Hey, Darth, Matthew, Kevin. Thanks for joining, guys.
Hello.
Allow. All right, so I'm gonna be swapping this over to my screen. All right, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
Cool. Now, why is this? Now, how do you, this is the thing about Zoom. How do you go back to the menu? There it is. How do I move this? There we go. Chat. All right.
Oh, I can see everything now.
Pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
All right. So first, I want to go over kind of the topics I'm going to be covering here today. Okay. So there's a couple things here that really are the backbone of everything. And one of it is knowledge engineering. Okay. The other is entity modeling. And the third thing that ties this all together with AI is prompt engineering, or what I call meta prompt engineering, right? So the reality is that this is a very in-depth process that basically does the entire concept of knowledge engineering in a top-down perspective, but it does it from a bottom up, right? And reality is the best way to do this and to get started with this stuff is to just basically perform knowledge engineering on yourself with your own expertise, right? And try to create representations, which are to create reasoning, and then applications off that, right? Because once you learn how to do this for yourself, you learn the process while you do that. And then that allows you to basically do it for anything, right? So, second, swap this. I'm going to turn off my camera for this one just so I can focus. Normally I'll have it on. Okay. Put my other screen. All right, so knowledge engineering is basically your goal is to create machine parsable formats of some kind of knowledge for the purpose of being able to perform machine learning techniques on it to get to basically get advanced reasoning and to be able to leverage machine intelligence for that specific domain or entity, right? So the crucial aspect that starts everything with this process is knowledge acquisition, right? Because most people going about their daily lives like have not spent the time to like sit down and like basically make like a knowledge base of your information that you personally have, right? It's just not something most people do or even have the time to do, right? And normally it's not even really something that useful. But if you've seen things on like Notion and stuff like that before, people were selling these like advanced templates and stuff basically called like a second brain. That's kind of how it actually works now when you do this, right? So the most important thing that is important to understand here is that everything starts from knowledge acquisition, right? You need to have basically a knowledge base, right, of structured information that represents the domain knowledge of a particular field, right? So basically what I'm going to be showing you here in this stream today is I'm going to be showing you this whole process of how you do this on my own data dynamically, so you can get kind of an idea and a feel for how this works, right? So what I'm going to basically be teaching overall is how to do this dynamically for anything, right? Because knowledge engineering is what helps establish advanced reasoning for certain domains, and this is like the foundation for everything else, right? Because you need to have domain knowledge modeled and cleaned and basically done before you can start really doing entity modeling, right? Because entity modeling is actually a part of knowledge engineering because you're trying to basically create an entity in a specific domain, okay? So you can make entities and do entity modeling separately, right? That's totally a thing, right? But the best way to do this is to basically have a stack of models in a sense, right? Like your goal when you're doing knowledge engineering initially is to create really complex, accurate, and advanced embeddings almost. That's like the end goal of this. And the only way to do that is to basically going through the whole training process that people typically do top down in order to do this. But this time you're going to be going bottom up, right? And there's just a lot of techniques and stuff and little tricks and ways to make this easier. But overall, it's the process itself is complex, but when you know how to streamline it, it's really not that bad. And the reality is that when you do this stuff, it saves you massive amounts of time, right? Because when you actually are able to do this successfully for something, right, you basically have models that you can inject into any kind of LLM and do tasks with that, and it saves you a massive amount of time when you're, especially when you're the one who built it yourself, right? So the basic process of this is knowledge acquisition, right? Gathering, analyzing, structuring knowledge from various sources, including experts, textbooks, databases, and the web. Now, I want to touch on this real quick, right? So what we're going to be doing here, and what I'm going to be proposing as like a first step to getting into this stuff, is basically trying to reverse engineer your heuristic model, right? Because when you go about life, you are learning and you're experiencing things, you make mistakes, you have challenges, right? You learn from all these things. It's a trial and error process, right? By you doing that, you gradually develop a better and more focused and more specialized heuristic model depending on what you've done and what you've learned, right? That allows you to use your knowledge efficiently by just basically making it instinctual in a sense, right? So what happens, and I've dealt with this a lot in engineering, is that you almost every business you have these engineers that are extremely smart and have like all the knowledge on how everything works, right? But it's mostly in their head. And then it becomes the job of multiple other people to try to do knowledge engineering, to try to basically structure and organize their knowledge in a way that other people can use, right? It's just kind of how this works. So what you can do as a first step here is you can basically do this step on your own knowledge, which is one process in itself, and basically try to create a knowledge base of that with a bunch of structured information, right? Now, once you have this knowledge base set up, right, it doesn't need to be perfect. The point of this knowledge base is just to have as much accurate information and knowledge that you yourself can validate with 100% accuracy to basically represent your own understanding of things, right? Once you have this done, this is the bedrock for doing everything else, right? Because once you have this done and you're happy with it, now you can start the training process, right? And the training process is basically, the goal of it is to create a knowledge representation, right? You're trying to create a comprehensive knowledge representation of the, yes, this can work with unstructured data too, absolutely. So you're trying to create a knowledge representation from this process, a comprehensive one that basically is the distilled knowledge of all of the knowledge base, right? And the reality is that it's never going to just be one form what the best knowledge representation is. When you have a knowledge base like this that is composed of expert information and structured knowledge, it can be on any kind of domain, right? It doesn't have to be science, doesn't have to be anything in particular, whatever you have experience in doing, right? When that's structured and clean, right? It's basically, it's like this knowledge base itself could be considered like a hyperdimensional information space in a sense, because you have a bunch of different measurements of domain knowledge structured and organized here, right? So what you're trying to do is you're trying to clean this and distill this into like a model almost, right? And that could be considered the first version of a knowledge representation, right? These are typically pretty massive, especially if you have a lot of training data to work with, but that's okay, right? Because the goal is to basically capture all the important information and basically be a distilled version of this model over here, right? Because when you do this successfully, it directly correlates with LLM reasoning. The better you do this, the better the LLM will be able to reason and basically absorb the domain knowledge and expertise into whatever it does, right? So this is the crucial next step. You perform knowledge acquisition, right, to create a knowledge base, and then you train that knowledge base to form a knowledge representation, right, for the goal of this, right, knowledge reasoning, right? You're trying to develop inference engines that use the represented knowledge to draw conclusions, make decisions, and solve problems, right? So going back into knowledge acquisition, right, the web is actually an extremely noisy place to pull data from. If you're just scraping all the data off the web and then training it, right, you hit a lot of overfitting problems, right, where a lot of noise is picked up, and just in general, there's just a lot of wrong information on the internet, right? Like, it's not so much about individual data points as much as it is about like if someone online at any point in time went through like a chain of reasoning and either did the chain of reasoning incorrectly themselves and or came to the wrong conclusion about something, right? That is basically what we were talking about yesterday about the exploiting some of these unsupervised learning algorithms, right? Because there's no real way to know if something is actually valid or not unless you are a domain expert in that direct field, right? And you already previously had the knowledge, right? There is no algorithm that is able to actually know 100% if something is valid or accurate, right? So this is why your own expertise becomes a limiter in a sense, because you have to be able to validate things in order for it to be able to be anything with coherence with everything else, right? So the most important thing here is creating the most clean and accurate database possible, right? Because if you do that correctly, the better and better you do that, the better and better your model will be. It's really all about data cleanliness, right? It's a huge, huge factor. And by doing this bottom up, you basically can control the data that you're making and you can make sure that it's as clean as possible, right? So that's the last step, validation and maintenance, right? There's a bunch of different ways that you can do this through every single step to basically be able to be confident in what you're doing and confident that you're not dealing with hallucinations and stuff like that, right? And we'll go through that too. So why do all of this? Like, what's the point of going through all this process, right? The point of this is to get the models, right? And to get the representations, because it directly correlates with reasoning, right? These representations and models can be used to make expert systems. They can be used to directly create really advanced chatbots and conversational AI, basically GPTs, right? You can use this kind of stuff to improve information retrieval and question answering, right? You can basically create these solution spaces, right, that have really advanced knowledge in something, right? And because of that, it can downscale questions accurately from these superimposed understandings based on whatever domain expertise you were modeling, right? It's pretty cool how it works. And then also just a general effect of this is just massively enhancing natural language understanding, right? When you do this, like the more and more and more you do this, it just directly increases NLU. I don't know what the scaling coefficient is for this, but it just continuously gets better. All right, so we got a knowledge base, which is how I kind of use Notion, right? Then you have an ontology, right? Ontologies are something that's really important. But the important thing about the ontology here is that it's a formal representation of concepts and relationships. Now, here's the thing. You don't really need an ontology, right? Because the point of an ontology is just our normal way of creating this formal representation, right? And we have standard languages for it and stuff like that, right? But there's a bunch of different ways to actually map relationships and concepts in a specific domain, right? You don't actually need to be limited to an ontology, and I never limit myself to an ontology, right? Ontology is simply just one part of many, many, many measurements that I do with these models to basically be able to recreate them in whatever way I want, right? So like when this says common methods include ontologies, rules, frames, that's correct, right? If you have, most of these is going to involve all of these, right? Because just making out knowledge representation itself doesn't achieve knowledge reasoning to the degree that it actually can when you have this set up right. You actually have to develop engines to run specifically for these knowledge representations to work properly, right? So that's the thing. Ontology is very important, but you can create formal representations of these relationships in whatever you are modeling in many different ways, right? And then you have to create a reasoning system that applies the rules and algorithms to it to do stuff, right? So this is basically how all this works. Once you have all this done, you can incorporate it into any kind of system, right? You can incorporate it into basically an expert system shell. This shell can be a software framework, but it also can simultaneously be stuff like GPTs, right? And any kind of agentic framework that allows you to inject these representations and engines and then run with it, right? So this is a basic gist of how you get into knowledge engineering. as the first basis, right? When you're doing this professionally, you're working with domain experts and you're basically trying to extract information from them that you need to be able to, one, validate that things are correct, and two, to even be able to do this in the first place, right? It's a back and forth process that you really can't avoid. So that's why the easiest way to get started is just doing it for yourself, right? Because it gives you the basis. And then as you learn how to do this for yourself, you become able to do this for anyone else too at the same time. You learn what kind of questions and things are important, and you basically start learning how to do entity modeling at that point, right? So once you let's assume you've already done this, you've already kind of set up a domain understanding with this through techniques I'll show you later, right? Now you can start actually like making entities that are basically little entities basically in this greater space of the domain, right? So these are kind of technically separate things. But when you start doing this, you're going to be modeling entities based on the domain knowledge you already modeled previously. So just keep that in mind. It'll project down when you do this at first, and then later you'll be able to extract things. So entities can be anything, right? It could be an object. It can be a person. It could be a company. It can be a physical object. It could be something abstract. It doesn't really have to be anything in particular, right? But you can classify them in different ways too, and you can attach different attributes to them. You're really in full control of how the modeling plays out. Now, there's a bunch of different ways that we typically do entity modeling, right? And typical formal ways that we present relationships, right? The simplest way is just one-to-one relationship mapping, right? The more complex way is one-to-many, where you actually map each node of the entity with its relationships with every single other node, right? And then many-to-many is basically that, again, increasing complexity, right? These are very complex mappings that basically do the full extent of the relationship mapping between different aspects of the entity, right? We can also present things in a hierarchy, right? So there's a lot of different ways that you can represent this stuff. ER diagrams is another way. The point of all of this is the same thing as what we're doing with knowledge engineering and domain modeling up here, right? The point of this is to model an entity that can operate with advanced domain knowledge and kind of embody that specific entity at the same time, right? And there's a bunch of different ways to map this and model this, okay? And then there's also, the best way to do this is just to formalize an ontology, right? And then you can convert it into a standard language like OWL, okay? Now, metaprompt engineering is kind of what ties everything together, right? Because metaprompt engineering is what allows you to do this bottom up in the first place. And it's what allows you to operationalize anything that you do with modeling, right? It's kind of like the gate between everything else. So this is just a basic, don't read too much into this right here. This is just like a basic thing that I gen to give me some talking points on this. But basic metaprompts are just higher order prompts in general. Like they're not going to be specific instructions, right? The thing is that metaprompts can take so many different forms. Like I have metaprompts that are like 30 pages long, right? There's really no end to what you can do with this stuff, because as you it just continuously scales with modeling, right? The more you model and distill and refine crucial relationships and nodes of whatever you're trying to work out of, just the better and better it gets. And then metaprompting allows you to just recursively improve things with reflection and these self-organizing patterns, right? So it's really an infinite process. It's like an infinitely optimizable process that only gets better and better as you continue to do this for more and more things, right? So this really doesn't mean anything here. This is decent here, where there's a bunch of different layers that typically are somewhat touched, at least in a metaprompt, right? Contextual information, you have to provide all the crucial information that it needs to be able to actually project a holographic semantic encoding of what it's supposed to do. And that just means that it has an extremely good idea of task and the system operational context, all from zero shot. So that way, everything that it's doing is being considered with all the crucial information at the whole time, right? There's typically always task instructions to some form. And then this is where a lot of people miss out on, right? Everything you do with meta prompting is directly scalable with everything I just explained above with modeling, right? The better of a job you do with modeling just directly enhances anything you're doing with meta prompting, right? Because you can, it's basically in a sense like persona modeling in a sense, right? It's not too different from that in how this actually works out, right? The problem is always just being gate kept by your own expertise, right? So that's why it's the best to just focus on what you yourself know 100%, model that out, and then you can start using recursive techniques to start expanding that out better. User preferences, this is personalized. I mean, you don't necessarily have to personalize stuff, but like if you're trying to streamline things and just get personalized responses, including personalized info in these meta prompts is a really good way to do that, right? Now, in reality, most systems into the future are going to have stuff for this already. Like when OpenAI releases the memory mechanics, they're going to have the personalized aspects they're able to be leveraged, right? Because it looks like it's going to be pulling high dimensional information from every conversation you've had. I'm not sure how long that's going to take, but it should help start these recursive distillation processes for a lot of people. Because as soon as you start seeing that, you can start refining it, and you'll start refining your own understanding of what you're doing as well in terms of instructions. It's going to be a really big deal, right? So once you do all of this and you have all of this done, right? How do you get this in a form that allows you to actually replicate this and just like build upon it with ease, right? Once you do all this and you have the meta prompting down too, you could basically convert these models into embeddings and tensor representations, right? And each time you do this, it basically formalizes different things that you were modeling before, right? So all this plays together. You're basically creating embedding models just by doing this process, just from the bottom up, right? And then this stuff perfectly pairs with any kind of vector database, any kind of process that uses vectors either, right? And then high dimensional data, the way to understand this is that it's basically just a data set with a massive amount of features, right? As you do modeling, you are creating like an infinitely expanding matrix almost of potential connections and relationships and stuff like that. It needs grounding in some form in order to actually interpret it at all, right? So dimensionality reduction allows you to control the lens by which it basically interprets this high dimensional data, right? It's really, really, really important because controlling dimensionality reduction when you're working with modeling allows you to basically control like how the novel things play out in a sense, right? You can control how it understands new information, and you can control the features that it preserves when it does the downscale mapping, right? Because you're trying to map, your goal is to map high dimensional data, right? So data with tons and tons of features into a lower dimensional space that preserves only certain features while maintaining everything else, right? That's kind of the goal here, because when you can do this, there's a lot of things that open up being possible, right? A lot of things that open up being possible. All right, so that's enough of that. Two tools I like to use here are Excalidraw, right? It allows you to just make up diagrams, and you can honestly paste this stuff or print it, put it into any of these models that have vision, and they can start to recreate what you were doing simply from the image, right? It's pretty cool. The Mermaid Live Studio editor, highly recommend. Mermaid in general is extremely overpowered. That's something that I've spent a lot of time fleshing out and incorporating into this process, right? Because there's so many types of it's intended to be like a no code diagramming language, right? And the reality is, because of that, it works extremely well with LLMs and allows you to perform mapping techniques in many different ways. And it allows you to capture a lot of different measurements of these models too, right? So I highly recommend getting into mermaid.js if you haven't already. There's really no way that it can not pay off for you. Let me look at these comments real quick before I continue. Yes, unstructured data to structured data is literally this one of the most useful things. So let's go to Voyage, right? I want to show you guys this. This is the reality of what you can do with this stuff, right? Well, every single thing you see here explaining like what this can do, it's the same exact thing that you can do with this stuff, right? You get extremely high quality context, right? And that's not just, it's not just limited to RAG, it's just how it works in general. There's no such thing as hallucinations when you do this correctly, right? It's going to be primed with expert domain knowledge, right? And it's going to be embodying that, right? So if you say something wrong in accordance to this domain knowledge, like it'll tell you that flat out, right? That's the cool thing about how this stuff works. Modularity, absolutely. We joke about this a little bit, but it becomes a little bit like floppy disking when you're doing this stuff, right? Because you can just, when you model this up, you can just swap in and out different stacks of different things to do things as you want in advanced ways, right? That's how this plays out. Multi-purpose, yep. There's a lot of ways that you can generalize this stuff to be able to be domain agnostic, basically. At the same exact time, anything that you can abstract and generalize, you can customize to even further degrees on specific domains. And then you can narrow it down even more to specific companies, right? There's really no end to what you can do with this stuff. These embedding spaces are really the goal of what a lot of people are doing, right? Because that is like the core refined expert knowledge of semantic understanding that you can then downscale to do actual tasks in, right? So there's a couple different ways they do this. Unlabeled fine tuning. That's basically this unstructured to structured data fine tuning happening, right? Without setting human labels. This is like this kind of stuff is what makes this stuff possible, right? There's a lot of uses of this kind of stuff. What was the other thing I wanted to show you? Maybe it was on the Anthropic one. I can't remember where I saw it. All right, it doesn't matter. Oh, maybe it was the OpenAI one.
It says Voyage AI there.
I'm trying to remember. I was looking at something last night where they had a nice. This isn't it, but this is still something similar. There's a lot of use cases with embeddings, right? Because they allow all kinds of stuff like clustering, recommendations, anomaly detection, diversity measurement, and classification, right? These are all like direct use cases of this, right? Like the first thing that I used with this stuff was basically creating classifiers and clustering models, right? And that allowed me to then streamline everything else. You can create surrogate models that people typically make top down, just bottom up, and use these kind of things and tools to streamline operations and other things, right? So there's basically methods and ways to do all these kinds of things in reverse. And each of these will have to be their own little dive themselves, but this is all possible to do, right? There's so many applications of this stuff. It's crazy. Can you start with unstructured information? Yes, absolutely. Finding the best data will be the gold mine. Yep. It's hard to create ASI when you sample on both ends of the bell curve. True. Oh yeah, thanks, Red. That's true. Okay, so It has Excalibur plugin. Nice. One day, I'm so deep into Notion now. Like I don't even want to think about what it would take. Do they have like a Notion to Obsidian conversion pipeline? That's what I want to know. Of course they do. Of course they do. I know so many people that use it. Oh, it was just like what happened was, if you want to know the truth, so I was setting this up on like another like on like ClickUp, I think, before Notion was even a thing. And then right as I was finished setting everything up on ClickUp, my brother showed me Notion. I was like, shit, this is so much better. So then I spent like all this time swapping it over to Notion, right? And then shortly after that, I heard about Obsidian. So I know it's really good. I'll probably check it out. Okay, but anyway, a lot of you here had some time to go through with me one-on-one, and I showed some stuff with meta prompting, and I used Anthropic's meta prompt as an example, right? So I'm going to do this really quickly. I'm going to go through similar things again, just in case you weren't able to do those sessions with me before. So that way you can have a general idea of these concepts when I show them in more depth later, okay? So I always, you know me, I always talk about system and task prompts, right? That's because I never really do anything without both of them, right? You're not even necessarily limited to putting one in one prompt and task in the other, right? You can do this in kind of any way. So this is Anthropic's meta prompt, right? There's been a lot of talk about this one. It is a really good meta prompt, right? For refining instructions and creating prompts, right? So if you haven't seen this before, I'm going to pretend like no one's seen this before. So this entire thing is one prompt, right? And when you haven't been working with this stuff a lot, you probably just looks like a bunch of random text, right? But the reality is every single line here has a purpose. Every single thing, every single token has been done in this exact way for a reason, and done through a lot of refinement as well, right? Now, there's the most important things to ever understand when you're looking at meta prompts like this is just the different layers, right? So the first layer is going to typically be the top and bottom framing. You can see here that they do a little semantic anchor here to kind of define what this is and then anchor it into a term, right? So they're defining that this is meta prompt text with a HTML tag here, H1, right? Let's look down here. I'm pretty sure they don't actually include that. Yeah, so that's something I do myself. And that's actually kind of funny. I just realizing I ran out. Okay, because I noticed another similarity here. Okay, so this is what all these companies are doing then. Okay, so basically you want to do this then for prompts, especially with complex prompts, is have an H1 tag and then actually create the title of whatever it is you're doing. And I'll show you directly why with Gemini, right? So in Gemini 1.5, if you do anything with it, it will always start with a title, right? So like here, for example, when it will always start with a title here. No matter what you do, it'll always start with a title, right? This is basically the intent classifier working, right? Because before it actually starts generating tokens, it needs to figure out what you're doing, and it's going to categorize your intent of your task, right? And then I'm pretty sure with Gemini 1.5, what they're doing is they're actually forcing it to go through this classifier first before actually printing, before actually doing the sequences. This is something I just noticed within the last few hours, actually. So it's interesting how this works. Basically, you're going to want to, these companies and everyone are basically slowly coming to similar ideas about how this stuff works, right? So when you see stuff like for example, OpenAI, GPT is tuned to basically follow the same kind of H1 tag at the start. Like what you're doing here is you're defining the intent of the prompt when you do this, right? And that allows you to control how it's classified, right? So in particular here, it's
it's defining the intent of the prompt, but it's also intentionally remaining very abstract, right? Because this is not really a word that it has a deterministic understanding of. Meta prompt has a billion definitions depending on how you look at it. So it's abstract intentionally, right? It's supposed to just mean a higher order prompt in general. Then they anchor this, right? They anchor this by defining the word, putting in a function, almost like a key value definition, right? And then they start with 3 triple brackets. These triple brackets are super, super clutch to understand. These allow you to delineate layers in a prompt when you use them strategically, right? Notice how, like, this is very important right here. This adds so much to the prompt in terms of how it's interpreted. I can't stress that enough, because you're not going to close these brackets until, where are we? Until the very end. See? So that alone basically delineates layers of the prompt, right? So this is the top layer of prompt right here, the first layer, right? This defines what it is. Then everything in between these triple backticks is basically considered a meta prompt, right? So then inside this meta prompt, what do you have? At first, you have the basic and the top framing instructions that kind of outline on a high level what it's going to be doing, but it doesn't actually tell it how it's going to be doing it. It just kind of tells it what it's going to be doing, right? These are the only actual instructions in this prompt, right? In a sense, everything past this point are all shots, every single one, right? So this is basically the start of inputting a task. And then in each one of these examples, I'm going to scroll down through, it's basically working out the reasoning behind how this task gets transformed into a output prompt, right? Now, the reality is that there's no way to do this without already knowing how to do this stuff in the first place, right? Like, whoever made this prompt knew how to refine out task prompts, already had some kind of engine going for refining things in this way. And they also knew a lot about feature engineering, right? Because this prompt is really, 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 really good at one thing. This prompt is amazing at letting you put in anything and determining what the most concise, fewest features are to represent that task in the best possible way. It's really, really good at that. And I credit that whoever made this fully for that, because they figured out a really good way to present the feature engineering aspects. But anyway, all of these are shots, and they're intentionally done in a way to progress in complexity. So it starts with more simpler things, and then as we go down here, it's going to get increasingly more complex, right? When you set things up in this way, simply by having this prompt and processing it, right, the AI is going to be able to learn immediately, all right, this is what this whole thing is. All right, now I have a high level overview of what it is. And now it basically progressively trains how to do this using shots instead of exact instructions. So instead of it actually training like a hard-coded process, right, it's training the higher order patterns behind all of these things when put together, right? So there's a bunch of different examples here, and they also do dynamic shots, which mean that each shot is a different domain and a different type of task that they can try to capture as many different measurements of however the system works in the prompt, right? So they're going to do this a bunch of different times. It doesn't really matter, because if you're not the person who made this, you're not going to be able to get a lot from this part itself. It's more important just to know how it works. So they're going to keep going all the way down here. None of this matters. None of that matters. None of that matters. These are all just shots. All right. Now here we are at the bottom, right? We're still in the meta prompt, right? But here you can see they finish the shots, and they say that concludes the examples. Now here is the task for which I would like you to write instructions. And then they frame an input variable like this, right? To write your instructions, follow these instructions. So now at the very end, they're starting to give some hard-coded instructions at the very end, right? After it's already learned from all of these shots, now it's providing framing to basically how to do this stuff, right? So these are the only real hard-coded instructions in this prompt, right? And it's basically just setting explicit anchors on these exact tags. Because if you didn't do this, you would have a lot of variability, right? It would probably still work, but by doing this, what they do right here, you're basically explicitly setting these tags as variables to basically do different things with, and this ensures that it uses these anchors in this manner, right? It's a double measurement. You're touching upon the intended behavior of these variables in different ways in different parts of the prompt for the point of few-shotting the higher order behavior of what you're trying to do here, right? Now, this is a little weird. I don't really know why. This is basically, so the only time you ever do this, these notes like this, is when you've already made a meta prompt and it's like you don't feel like having to go back and like refine everything out to actually like incorporate the this is like fine tuning, right? Because when you're testing this, one of the easiest ways to fine tune a meta prompt is just to add instructions at the bottom and try to like concisely fine tune what to do with feedback, right? It's not a bad method. It's just that when you have to make a bunch of notes like this, it typically means that there's a better way to just make the prompt in general. Like for example, you don't actually have to, where is it? Another name for what you're trying to write is a prompt. Like you don't really need to do that. Like this actually reduces the complexity a little bit, but it's fine. I'm just min-maxing here. But these are like guiding principles, right? In a sense, because they're trying to provide high level overview of like what to do in order to do this properly. Most times you are going to have guiding principles like this, just not in this way, right? And I'll show you more examples. So this is their prompt, right? They made this prompt to work in the API and to work in a zero shot, right? But the reality is that that has a ton of variability and is not the best way to meta prompt, right? You want to reduce variability with meta prompting as much as possible, because that's what actually allows you to leverage this stuff to the full potential of it, right? So that's the basic gist of their prompt, right? I'm going to show you now quickly how to get this working anywhere, right? In any LLM. So keep in mind, GPT is not fine-tuned for Anthropic's prompting style with the XML tags, right? They use HTML and other stuff. Maybe I can pull up the, I don't remember where it is. Anyway, so if you just enter this in, this is going to be very similar to how this prompt was intended to be used, just in a different LLM, right? Now, if I were to fill in this with a task, right, this would be exactly how the prompt was intended to be used, right? So let's just try this out, how it was intended to be used. Someone give me a task, an AI task. There we go. I like it. All right, so it immediately knew what to do, right? Even though this is a complex, novel prompt, right? Like I don't think GPT has been trained on this kind of logic. It knows what to do, right? And it's doing it technically correctly, right? So that's how you know that there's really strong behavior encoded in a meta prompt like this, right? That's how you know you have a very strong behavior projected from a prompt. Now, here's the thing that's so important to understand. So important to understand is that if you did not make a meta prompt, you don't actually know, you can't actually be 100% sure like what the best kind of output is supposed to look like, right? Like you could see this and be like, oh, that was amazing. Like this is perfect. Like this is as good as it could be, right? But you would be wrong, right? Because the reality is when there's behavior this strong, if there are not anchors set in some manner, you're going to get so much variability that it's not going to really be super useful for you, in a sense that you really want to make this behavior slightly more deterministic in some manner in order to actually be useful to the degree that you can actually, like, this is an amazing prompt, right? I actually think this is an amazing prompt. It's just that it lacks other kind of mechanics of things that you can do to be able to actually leverage this stuff properly. Like if you were just zero shot, this isn't really zero shot, this is multi-shot, but if you were just single turn spamming stuff with this, you're going to get a lot of variability with how it plays out. And it's going to do slightly different things every single time, right? And that's just natural because it's never seen this prompt before. It's never done anything like this before, technically, in terms of what it was trained with. So there's going to be a lot of variability. So in general, when you have complex prompts like this, there's going to be a lot of variability, and there's going to be a lot of factors that you're not actually controlling. The reality is, by setting anchors, you can do many things. You can completely control the behavior of this. You can narrow this to increasingly more advanced degrees the better you do this. And you can basically prime this stuff perfectly to save as much time as possible by just continually learning more and more and more behavior that you want in a tree-like style, and then just tasking out from those points, right? So this is basically the intended way to do this, right? You're setting a single task, and then it's making instructions. So this really only trains the meta prompt in a very certain manner when you do this. So it learns how to use this language almost in a certain direction. That's not a bad thing, right? It's still a good thing, right? But there's better ways to do this to both increase the amount that's learned and control it more at the same time, right? So what I was talking about before with how bottom framing like this is a good way to control this stuff, right? There's a reason why I say this really isn't the best way to do it, even though it's still a good way, right? Because you don't really need to frame things like this. What you can do is just hard anchor responses with extremely concise tags and syntax to achieve the same thing, but in a way better way, right? So down here is an example of one that I refined out specifically for the Anthropic meta prompt, right? Because this is one, so like I wouldn't be able to just instantly know that this is the best one to use for this one, but as I use it and tested different ones, right, you can go back and you can kind of refine this out as you use it, right? So like I know that I can just copy this, right, and put this into the bottom of the meta prompt, and like without even having to try it, I know that it's going to follow exactly what I want it to do, right? And look at the difference of what happens when you do this, right? All right. It's doing a much better job now. All right. And now the important thing to understand when you're doing this stuff is, even with what I just showed you, I'm still using this in the way that they intended slightly, right? By including a task in this. By including a task in this, the way, like what you're doing here, you are forcing a decision in a sense. You're forcing a narrow decision in a sense. You're forcing it to understand how to use this language specifically for this. Because this is done in the first step, you always have to consider the first step of any kind of conversation in these systems to basically be the master gate that everything else is going to be based off of, right? Because any kind of decisions that are made in any part of any response is going to be done from whatever is projected from this initial prompt, especially when you're working with complex stuff like this, right? So in reality, you really, when you're working with complex stuff like this, you want to prime it in the most open-ended way possible to learn as many aspects of the behavior as possible, right? Because if you can get it to do something without actually defining a task, that would technically be a better way to learn this prompt, right? And then if you had a better way to learn this prompt, well, then you would want to do that, because then anything you did past that point would just get better, right? So for one example of how you can do this. Oh my gosh. Is just not provide a task. Okay, we're gonna not. What do you think will happen if I don't provide? I just leave everything else the same. I just move a task, right? What's probably happen is that it's going to create its own task. Weird. So it's actually this is emergent right here, right? So this is actually a little different. Interesting. Oh, it did it right there. Okay, that's fine. Huh. So this is the reality of this, right? So it's like this isn't actually how it's supposed to do it, right? But this is actually being done in an even more complex way, in a sense. Let's just see what it does. Okay, so it didn't do this right. So because it didn't do it right, I'm not going to want to actually use this, right? That's the thing about when you set this up open-ended like this, you need to be careful, right? Because your goal is to try to have this learned in a more advanced way, but it can do it wrong, right? And that's where it's important to be able to verify the output. So like this is not how it's supposed to be, right? So I'm going to try and just refresh this, right? Because that's the cool thing about these dialogue systems, is that you're in full control of how this plays out, right? Like you can just keep refreshing this until it works, basically, as long as you know what it's supposed to do. As soon as it does it right one time, you're set. That's a long reflection. There we go. There we go. Looking good so far. Okay, I did one thing wrong, but other than that, it's doing it perfectly. So the one thing it did wrong is it did not include the input tag. Right. So this is the thing. When you it's a tug of war, right? Because the more you leave it open-ended, the harder it technically is to do what I'm trying to do right now. But when you can do it, right, it works. So it's like it makes it worth it, right? Because if you can have it do this correctly from a more abstracted starting point, it will always have a more complex and more advanced understanding of the task and the task space itself by doing it, right? So it got really, really close. So basically, the end point of this step is more generalized reasoning and task transformation potential compared to one where there was a hard-coded task, right? Because depending on the next task I put in here, it's more open. There's more complexity and potential for the different ways that whatever understanding was created here to be changed in unique ways. When you hard code a task at the start, you're locking in the specific patterns that were propagated for that specific transformation, right? So when you're priming like this, you want to try to do it in the most open-ended manner possible, right? Ideally, what happens when you do this is that you can get it to almost create an abstracted version of the overall task itself. That's the best way to do this. I typically refresh this and change this until that happens, right? either way, now you have that now that this is learned, right? If I'm happy with this, pretending like I'm happy with this, this behavior is learned at this point. So anything I do from this point forward is going to build from the very first token upon anything I had previously done. And because I know that, right, I don't really need instructions anymore, right? You don't really need instructions anymore. All you really need is a task prompt, right? And the cool thing about this kind of setup is that you can just copy paste this, right? And then you can come up here and you can copy paste the input template, right? This is your task prompt, right? And you already know that it correctly followed this response template in the last response. The patterns between this kind of input and what it's supposed to do is learned at this point. So you can exploit that, right? So you can know that no matter what you put in here, it's going to follow this response style perfectly in its response, even if you put in complex stuff right here, right? So I would never ever in a million years ever start this. Like sometimes I might just start it with something, right? Like it's not the end of the world, right? But what I would never ever ever do is I would never ever ever start this with a complex task, right? Because it would not learn it correctly. It needs to learn the prompt first before it knows how to be able to use the prompt properly on top of a complex input, right? So you typically want to build this up in complexity as you go, right? So at first, okay, it did it right, but I want to be sure that it has learned the patterns correctly, right? So did anyone else put a random task in here? And no tasks. Put some good here, guys. Give me some good tasks in the chat, a couple of them, so that way I have some things to pull from. I want like unique things that like I wouldn't think of, basically. It could be anything. There you go. Perfect. Thank you, Matt. All right, so this is like a basic thing, right? And this is a good one too, because we'll be able to validate if it's doing the input variables correctly, right? So with everything else aside, this is an amazing way to just see the best inputs that you should frame prompts around, right? With nothing else. Yeah, this isn't like I would never actually use this thread myself just because it's reflecting way too long and it's not doing the inputs correctly in terms of the final prompt. But other than that, it's doing a good job. Right? So let's see. Duration, interests, accommodation preferences, okay. Day of trip, good. So it's pretty accurate in the aspects to try to capture. Right. And you can see how this is the other nice thing about this meta prompt is that it trains it to use the semantic tags in the instructions itself. And like that's what really few shots the behavior of these, right? Because it's not only anchoring these variables here, right? It's also using them in every single line of the instructions, right? So it's a great task prompt engine, right? This is a great way to make task prompts, right? Because it streamlines the aspect of a couple different parts of this, right? You can streamline variable selection and you can get some pretty solid instructions. Now, the reality is these are never going to be the best prompts, right? But it's a way to streamline stuff and also expose yourself to different ways to make prompts, right? Because there's so many different types of engines of prompting engines because there's so many different ways to get from point A to point B, right? That's why I don't really think you should ever focus on just one meta prompt. There's so many different types, right? I never really use prompts like this straight from an engine because there's typically different ways to do things that it's like the only way to really get this stuff going well is to make it deterministic in some manner, but that doesn't make it not useful, right? anyways, so I tested this with a task, right? And I see that it works, right? And because of that, okay, so it just did 2 shots. These are 2 different types of tasks, right? The first one, it came up with itself, I think, in this one. Yeah, it came up with it itself, and then we gave it one here. So now, this is pretty few shot at this point, right? Like this behavior is pretty learned at this point. I'm going to copy that. David, that's great. So this is a little bit more of a complex task, right? Because it has a task on a specific entity with another condition. And it's also asking to give specific things of what it should do to be able to. So it has to be able to do all of this and then answer the questions, right? So this is naturally a more complex task, right? Thank you, David. Right, and when you do this like this, if you have unique tasks in a building complexity, and you're able to actually get it to do the right thing in a unique way over multiple steps, that's another form of generalizing the behavior in a sense to allow unique instruction crafting for different types of tasks, right? Honestly, the most useful thing of this stuff is just quickly refining your thoughts and instructions and stuff like that for what you're trying to do, because you can use a lot of this stuff in different ways in combination with other instructions and stuff like that to do a lot of things. So this did a pretty good job. So had us pick the Tesla model and the snowstorm conditions. I mean, it would technically need more information about the Tesla model. I guess that could be considered in there. But it did it right? In a sense. It's working how it thinks it's supposed to be working right now. That's all that matters right now. All right, so it did it 3 times now. All right. It's working each time. Like I know the behavior's learned at this point, right? So now you can test like more advanced things in terms of seeing what happens, right? So there's like a higher order behavior learned here. It's both deterministic in certain aspects, in terms of these anchors are deterministic at this point. It's always going to want to try to follow these anchors unless you try to hard force it away at this point. None of this was defined, right? If you look at this instruction, I don't actually tell it what any of this is, right? All I do on the very first one, where is it? I force it to start with this semantic tag, right? I force it to start with that. Why do I do that, right? Because it's basically it's giving it a second to think, right? If you try to just instantly execute a meta prompt like this, it has not had time to learn what it is, and you're going to get so much variability when doing this. Forcing this reflection at the start of a complex task, it's this. You can do this with the Python tool too, right? You can swap. I could, maybe we can try this in a minute, but I mean, you could probably just swap this with a Python tool call to have it reflect on this before it actually prints any tokens in text. I do that kind of stuff a lot. It doesn't technically have to be done in this manner, and it also saves you tokens so that way you can get the full response into the prompt, right? The only reason why I don't do that often right now in ChatGPT is because the second you call the Python tool in a session, you start the timer, or not, I guess you don't start the timer. You basically initialize the stateful environment for the Python tool, right? And you're on a timer at that point, because as soon as you don't use the conversation for like 2 to 3 hours, it closes that environment. So that messes a lot with the learning that happened in the conversation, because it's losing context suddenly on things that it was already using to inform its decision making, right? So I like to try to not use a Python tool unless I'm not really planning on using the conversation after that point, or if I have things framed 0 shot where I can just execute Python tool calls from the start. That's like the final form of that, right? So typically I try to find ways. I don't really worry about the tool chains at first with this stuff, and then I start incorporating tool chains as I keep refining the zero shot logic, right? Because everything you're doing here is really trying to refine zero shot logic. That's the end goal of most of this stuff. All right. So anyways, we did 3 tests of this meta prompt, right? We shaped how it projected with open-ended template, right? And it was forced to figure out on its own what these things mean. So it's at full complexity for its understanding of what this is. Because of that, I know that there's multiple things that I can now do and be confident that it's going to work and it's going to do cool things, right? So it's learned this behavior only around simple inputs, right? So, but it has a strong behavior with it now. It's done it multiple times. So if you greatly adjust one of these factors at this point, right, without like hard coding anything else, that's going to directly cause a lot of emergence in terms of like you can do a lot of different things kind of projecting from that previous behavior in new directions, right? So one example of this is that I know now that I could put in complex tasks or just complex information in general, and it will be able to do something with it, even if you're inputting a massive amount of text, right? The behavior is very strong at this point. So as an example of this, like I don't know, I'll go into your Discord and I'll like copy a section of these distilled histories randomly. Here from 226. I'm gonna copy like a bunch. This might actually be too much. All right, and I'm gonna paste this. There's a lot of random text. All right. This has nothing to do with what we were doing up here. This is just random crap, right? But I know the behavior for this transformation is learned, right? So I also know that it's forced to go through this transformation again, even if what I input makes no sense to the task at hand, right? It's basically going to be forced to do something with this information on top of a transformation, right? So that's the power of having this higher order behavior prime already, right? Because now you can just start experimenting with more complex things, leveraging that behavior from the start, okay? So I have no, like right now, I have no idea what will happen, right? Because I'm not actually, this is like, this is an emergent task, right? I have no idea what it's going to make, but I can be pretty damn sure that it's going to be something pretty cool, right? Whatever it decides to come up with. So let's see. I mean, if I had to guess, it'll probably come up with some distillation task, because that's kind of what it's related to. Now, if you actually wanted the most creative and random behavior from this point, you would actually want to remove the quiet reflection, because this is giving it time to think and narrow down on what it's supposed to do. If you gave it less time to think in this case, it would actually have the effect of having more different and unique responses. This is actually reflecting way too long. So look at that. It's coming up with it's basically a distillation engine, right? I have no idea what it's doing here. Oh, it's making a little prompting explorer. There you go. This is a terrible prompt, because it's like you already have to have. I mean, you could just remove all of this and then just input a distillation, right? But either way, right? You see what it's doing. It's forced through a transformation, and it's forced to kind of come up with some kind of way to make sense of it, right? So this is just a random example, right? I don't typically actually do this in terms of like, because you're not going to always get something. You're not going to typically get like a useful prompt doing this method. But what you can see is you can expose yourself to creative ideas and types of prompts that you could then make when you see the different types of things it can do. Because you got to remember, like you can refresh this. You can do this an endless amount of times for any kind of input, and you'll always get something different here. I'm going to actually remove. Actually, no, I'll show you something else here. Okay, so anyway, you see what I'm doing here with inputting this, right? So you're not just locked in to doing this particular transform at this point, right? You don't actually need to transform this complex information through this instruction structure here, right? This hyper complex example has been learned in terms of what the AI is supposed to do with these anchors in its response. Okay. So because of that, and because I have this reflection logic here and it's already learned, right, I can basically pivot it to do something else, leveraging this higher order behavior in a new direction simply with these tags, right? So because this is a bunch of knowledge or information that was distilled, right, it's really not a prompt. It's not really like material for a prompt, right? But what it could be is it could be material for even further distillation that considers more basically a distillation of distillations of knowledge, right? And it's very easy to set that up, right? Because all I could do, and I can know this will work without even trying anything at this point. Summary. I'm going to change these tags. And I'm going to change the syntaxes of these code boxes, because as you can see, each of these has its own little code box syntax with triple dots to indicate that it's supposed to be filled out, right? And I can change these to whatever I want at this point, right? So I can do MD here. I could do, I don't even know what I want to do. Let's just do regular text. Here we can do, actually, no, we'll do something here. And we'll do mermaid here. Okay. So nothing in this conversation had anything to do with distillation, right? So I'm hard pivoting this right now, only changing anchors like this in a completely open-ended way. That is going to basically try to shift this in a new transform that still uses that behavior, right? So this is going to work, right? And it's going to work because of the reflection logic that's already been learned, and because of the output template that's already been learned, right? And you can see at the start how it still thinks it's making instructions, right? But because I'm having it reflect before it makes a decision, it's able to correct itself, right? That's the power of this stuff. And that's the power of being able to control this and control decision making when it collapses, right? Because you can steer this stuff to any degree you want, right? And you can know it'll work without even trying it. So this wasn't even remember, we're using the anthropic meta prompt here. This is never supposed to be a distillation engine, right? Like this was never supposed to do any of this stuff or even be used in a multi-turn situation, right? And look at that. Because this behavior is fully primed at this point, I can use this step. I mean, you can do this with anything, right? Like the point here is that you were training these higher order behaviors on top of a complex task, on top of a meta prompt, on top of other things. You're chaining gates of logic here, right? For the point of evolving this behavior in a very certain way to do things. So now all of a sudden, that was a pretty solid distillation, right? You got multiple measurements. You got a summary. You got key points. You got the some basic aspects mapped, completely open-ended. Like I didn't set any of these keys on my own, right? Like it came to that on its own. And relationship map, right? So that's really cool. So this is just a really good example of what you can do at this point, right? You can transform this in any way you want, right? Now, at this point, I can also do something else. Like I can fine tune this even further, right? Like I don't really like how long we can see here how useful it was that it was able to steer it and how it was intending, right? But it's still, I don't think it really needs to reflect that long. That's a long time. Probably cut that down. Right. Might work. This I'm not sure if this will work or not. It should shorten it at least. Yeah, there we go. See? So this is the reality of this, right? When you have this stuff fully primed like this with concise anchors, you don't really need instructions anymore, right? That's just how this stuff works. And it's the reason this works is because you're basically priming this very rich high dimensional space that has also been narrowed in algorithmic behavior for a certain type of task. That's kind of how this stuff plays out when you put all this stuff together, right? And the reality is that you're not in any way limited to this prompt, right? Everything I was talking about for the beginning of the stream is all stuff that can be converted into meta prompts and used with different types of meta prompt gates in infinite different ways, right? There's really no end. Like this is a meta prompt for intent, like it's primed for writing instructions. And what it really does is it kind of trains a shared language at the same time with a lot of strong behavior. And because of that, you can basically downscale that behavior in different ways to do advanced tasks with ease, right? But it's not technically the best to be doing this from a prompt that was framed around writing prompts, right? There's typically better ways. This was also done with someone else's knowledge, right? So it's always going to be better to do this in ones that are interpretable to you. And especially when you build it yourself, because you'll be able to do anything with it, right? So that's just the cool stuff about all of this, right? There's just a lot of different things that you can do with this. This is the one thing that's really nice about GPT's more algorithmic behavior is that you can basically prime stuff like this and be confident that it's always going to work and it's always going to build upon the start of the last response. It's just how it always works, right? This is applicable to everything. This doesn't really touch tool chains at all, but that's probably going to have to be another day because that just adds another degree of complexity to everything, right? Because you could do all of the same stuff that I just showed you and then also add in a whole other layer of tool logic and sequencing for tools that could all happen at the same time, right? Like if I had the right sequence, I could just paste that in right here probably and execute like a 20 chain Python tool call right here, just like that, right? And it probably would be a couple sentences, honestly. But you have to, the reality of these tool chains is that they don't maintain coherence long enough to be able to actually work unless you basically hard code the steps ahead of time. In the future, that might be different. Like they're going to find better and better ways to maintain like multiple layers of these propagating patterns at the same time. But right now, you know how it goes. When you try to use this stuff, most of the times it doesn't actually work very well. But when you actually engineer the proper sequences and flows, it starts working out really well, right? Let me go through some comments before I go to the next part. Is there any questions so far? Like, is this making sense? In new fashion. Currently add a function called fetch a random list of 20 words and tell it to consider these. Yeah, that's a good. Yeah, I remember you talking about that before, Keith. Basically, that is I've been thinking about this on and off for a little bit actually, because what you just described is a good way to inject that randomness, like you're talking about, while also maintaining deterministic behavior. You would need to play with. You basically need to build projection logic on the other side on how to handle that randomness, but then that could actually work really well. It would just need to be built out to make sure that it doesn't. The problem is it's random, so like the random tokens going in can have unintended side effects depending on if it just happens to make certain sequences, if that makes sense. But there's probably a lot of use cases of that. Yeah, so there was a yeah, you're right. The reflection does cover that exactly. Yeah, the quantum error reduction rate, and they also released something today or yesterday about, I think they got up to 100 qubit or 1,000 qubits in coherence or something like that. But all this stuff ties in together in reality. The way error correction works with this stuff is not too dissimilar from anomaly detection with this behavior, right? Okay, I think that's all the questions. So now I wanted to go through a more specific example of knowledge engineering. Have some fun with that. All right, so I shared a prompt in the Discord that I like to use for this stuff. Okay. So this is honestly a great prompt. And I'm going to show you how to use this stuff. Okay. Because this is a good way to get your some hands-on experience with a lot of how this works. So if you remember before, I was showing you knowledge engineering, entity modeling, right? I made this prompt a while ago, but as you can see here, I'm basically just telling it to prime for these direct things, right? With a placeholder name. I'm telling it what I'm going to do in the future steps and basically what it should do directly. And then that's all I'm doing, right? And then I just basically just have an open-ended framing here, what it's supposed to do. I also have the task prompt built out before I start this, right? Because this is going to be an algorithmic process. This is intended to be an algorithmic process, right? Because I want to be able to just copy paste in stuff that I already refined and have it basically build this formula to the full extent possible, right? It doesn't really work. It's not really going to be automated like that, right? But it's going to be able to do a really good job regardless. But there's still a lot of things that you have to know and be aware of when you're doing this stuff to know how to actually leverage this, right? So that's what I'm going to show you. So there's a bunch of different ways that you can do this, and it really just depends on how direct you're trying to be. But the best platform to do this on right now is Gemini, because Gemini 1.5 has a massive context window, and it also has really good classification for different types of prompts, and it has really good recall. So I wasn't a big fan of this before they swapped it to showing the live response streaming, but I'm liking it a lot better now with that, because you can quickly see if it's working or not instead of having to wait like 5 minutes. So anyways, there's multiple ways you can start this, right? You can either start it with a direct prime, like if you already have a KR or something, you can pretty much just paste it here and then directly prime from that initial thing. Or you can have it come to an open-ended understanding first before starting that, right? This really just depends on how you want to have your anchors set. I would say if you're starting from complete unstructured text and like you haven't been distilling or structuring this stuff at all, I would avoid priming with any of it at first. I would prime it with just the prompt and maybe not even, no, here you could probably give the name. What you can even do is you can take this another step further and do something like this. Basically tell it that it's going to be discovering what the entity is based on the next input, right? This kind of primes it for a more open-ended understanding, which can be better for unstructured transformation. We can try it. right? See, it knows what to do. And it's pretty damn fast too. I actually don't like what it did here because it already hard set anchors. I'm not a big fan of that. I'm actually going to redo this because I'm going to use myself as an example here for this. So I'm just going to put my name, alias. I'm going to put it here again. This is basically me setting the parent key of the object, and that's it, right? So we should do something similar. Okay, so we didn't even print one there. And now remember, everything you do with this stuff can be continuously narrowed down just by having a response template that you like, right? So like, for example, you know me, I already have one, right, that I like for this. So I'm going to replace all this with this, right? Delete that. Right, so what is this doing now? I'm not sure if you can see. Right, this is kind of setting the anchors, the main anchors for this JSON object, right? Tributes. This is as abstracted really as you can get it, right? But it also leaves a lot of room for different things. In reality, this is definitely not the best way to do this. It would be better to not define any of these at all, or actually even better would be to continuously abstract them and delineate them as you curate more information, right? Because this is going to get, this is a little too narrowed to capture all of the different types of information that will be here, right? So we'll see what happens. Ideally, I like to have it create its own. So I don't typically use this response template here, but it's just an efficient way to get this set up. It's like you'll know it'll work before you have to try it, basically. Right. Okay. So now, because I have a task template that I already showed you here, right? Like I know this task template is going to work. And because of that, I can just paste it in and I have like a transformation template here now, right? I can put in stuff here and it's going to consider it and create a refined and more complex KR, right? So this is where having structured data or unstructured data of some form on this entity, this is where you basically want to have your knowledge base, right? Because you basically want to keep running this and keep refining this with as much information as you have, because it can maintain the complexity through as much context as you want, right? You can have up to 1 million tokens of training data, right? And have it all be considered for this model, right? So the more data you have, the better it'll be. And the problem is you don't want to start this part until you've already condensed and structured as much data as you can, right? You can use this stuff to help structure things, but I wouldn't use models done from this until you've already had enough training data to do it properly from the start, if that makes sense. That's the best way to do this, to actually capture all the relationships, right? So because this is primed now and it already knows what to do, you need a knowledge base, right? I need a knowledge, whoever this dude is here, I need knowledge on him, right? Either I need to know the knowledge or I need to have some kind of knowledge base to pull from, right? So in a sense, Discord is slowly becoming a second knowledge base for me just because of how much we talk on there. But I know that I can go on here and literally just extract sections of text of conversations that I have, right? And that will pretty much always be able to provide some context on me, on who I am, and like what I know, right? So of the random, like I'm trying to scroll as far as I can, right? But I don't typically do it this way, but this is just an example of, this is the worst possible way to do it, because you're just throwing in random text, right? But it'll still work to some degree. That's what I'm trying to show you here, right? So like, this is the really cool thing about 1.5 and cloud, right? Because the embedding models allow them to basically maintain coherence continuously with massive complex inputs and transformations in every single turn, right? Especially with how they do the pasting, how they handle the pasting objects it works so well. It's crazy, because you can basically put a prompt here and then paste in multiple complex things, and it will always be able to follow along with what's going on. No other, not even Gemini can do that. Gemini will get a little weird if you try to delineate things too much, but clouds like this right here is insane at it. I can't overstate that enough. All right, but anyways, so the real beauty of these two systems here is that you can do stuff like this. You can perform complex transformations after a single prime, right? And whatever happens here is basically the gate, which everything else is going to be done through, right? So you always want to make sure this is done up to standards in terms of it understands what you're trying to do, right? Now, I don't include the response template here. And because I don't include it here, it's like a 50-50. Actually, it's probably like a 75-25. More than likely, it'll probably follow along with the same thing. But the more of a complex input I put in here, there's more and more of a chance that it will just skip that and just start straight from the KR, right? If you don't maintain application of these at some points, the more of a complex input you put in, it can start to stray away. So that's why setting anchors that you are happy with, that you like to have things built around in multiple responses, is a good way just to continue very certain aspects of the behavior in the way that you want, right? So I'm going to not include that here just to see what happens. And then just hit enter. Okay. So what it's supposed to do, all right, so there you go. It followed, oh, it actually screwed something up. It timed out. Well, that's Gemini for you. Let me redo this. See, the reality is that for some reason, if you do it like this happens sometimes, but if you just turn it into a text document, upload it, and then just paste it in this box, it works even better. Let's try it again. It's probably I bet you it's going to mess up again. I typically do it to the text document, like I was saying. All right, there you go. Now it's working. All right, so it did a decent job, right? These are, I mean, it's kind of basic stuff, but I mean, it's only working with what it knows, right? It's basically capturing focus and data poisoning. Because I talked about it one time. That's hilarious. But you can see it's basically capturing high dimensional information on this entity in an unsupervised manner, right? The only labels that it's basing things off of are the labels that it's set from the start, right? It doesn't really have labels picked, so it's choosing on its own, right? So it's going with what it has. So that's a very basic. So I mean, this is a pretty clean distill, though. I mean, from this specific conversation, it did a good job capturing those points, right? From what it is, right? But it can only work with what it knows. Like it can always map something wrong. It could always just understand something incorrectly. And that's why it's important to be able to always like be in the loop basically and see what's going on. Because if it does something wrong, well, like I know, like, oh, that's not I don't really focus on data poisoning very often. That was like a one-time thing, right? It's not really a focus here. So when you add in more information, it might misconstrue the importance and the relationships between different things, right? That's why, honestly, the very first time you start with this, it's probably important to start with the best possible information you have on this entity from the start, just so that you can provide the most multi-dimensional view possible instead of just restricting it from a smaller manner here, right? So for example, one way that you can start this is if you have a LinkedIn, you can go to your LinkedIn and you can save your profile to a PDF. Okay. It's on your homepage and you can just literally copy paste this. I'm going to do this right now. And save this to Google Drive. Okay. So let me delete this prompt because this isn't actually how you want to do this in here. All right. Instead, I'm going to remove it. I'm going to insert this file here right now. Now, typically, honestly, I paste this into a text file typically, and instead of PDF. Sometimes it can. Sometimes with Gemini, if you have it in PDF, it'll work most of the times, but sometimes it just gets really messed up. I think it's because it keeps a lot of the formatting in it, but we'll try this anyway. It should still work. And you can see how many tokens it is. This is something I really like about this interface. Right, so you can literally start with something like this. Like what you're doing here is that if you've spent the time before at any point in your life to like set up a profile or something for yourself, that's like a deterministic start, right? That's a really great way to start this modeling process, to give like a really good thing. But you can also see how everything is getting framed around these anchors, right? It's always going to be captured. So this is a good way to capture basic information, right? But in reality, this is restricting it heavily. It's restricting it heavily, right? I don't actually want it to be restricted that much. It should be able to capture a lot more data with a lot more things, right? So that's how you start it, right? So let's go back. So, right, so it has a profile, even though it didn't do a great job on the KR. Why is it not a big deal, right? Because this is just distillation in a certain direction. The information is still here, right? The full complexity information is still fully in the context right here. And it's been distilled in a certain direction in the response, right? So even though it didn't capture the full complexity of the information here, there's two gates here, right? So you're providing two different measurements of the same information. So now you can do other things, right? So now it has a decent understanding of background, right? So now, what if I haven't spent time past that profile I just mentioned to map more things? What if I just want it to be able to learn what I've done differently since then, right? Like, or what if I want it just to be able to build out a better knowledge representation, I mean, in general, right? Well, that's where knowledge in general, just having spent the time to curate knowledge and data on yourself and stuff like that pays off, right? Because anything you have that you've spent the time to do that with can be added to this knowledge representation in different ways to flesh it out, right? So let me find some stuff. Right, like for example, like I want to put in like my link tree, right? Let's see what happens. Now, ideally, it should add all of this in there some way. Okay, it's still, it's basically, so this is like mapping. This is, I mean, it's not bad. This is just mapping like the finest points possible because it's restricted to these two things, right? So because of that, because I'm in the loop, Something like that. I'll see, but it lost adjacent. That's fine though, honestly. Right. So it's see how it's recursively tuning the initial keys that would better capture it, right? So this was now just a recursive optimization of the initial keys. Okay. Because that happened, now you can go back. Where were we? Same prompt, forcing JSON, right? Now let's find some other information. Let's go to Discord. I'm just going to copy these guides I made. Oh, it's gonna fuck up again. If there's a way to just make a text file straight from here. It might be fine. Right. But the point here is that it didn't do it right. It didn't do it. It didn't switch to JSON. That's probably because I made it. Okay, so the reason why this happened was because I made a change and then I did it at complex transformation immediately after that. So sometimes it hasn't had time to few shot the behavior yet, right? So this is what happens sometimes, right? That's why it's important to be in the loop. So it still did it, right? But this isn't actually, the only reason why I wanted it to swap away from JSON was to recursively optimize the keys, right? But it's not actually doing a good job here in terms of a KR. I wanted to swap back to JSON here. So let's delete this. So since I just made that transform, all right, I'll give it something smaller to work with. This would be way better if I just set the anchors. But I'm just trying to show this without having, I'm trying to show this in the most streamlined way possible. No, it's still not doing it. Where are my anchors that I made for this? Where are you? Here they are. So this is what I'll do. So here's the thing. I mean, it's still doing the right job. It's just the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing right now is because I know it can be better in terms of what it does for this step. So I'm just recursively improving this basically. So I'm going to re-add this response template, and I'm also going to add this back in, right? I might actually hard code this now. This is a really good way to maintain the complex transform while still doing what you want. Okay, so I want this in. I can remove this. Okay, so this should work now because it already had this in the very first prompt, so it'll immediately link it with that, or at least it should. Let's try another complex input. This is a lot easier when you just have the stuff saved in text files. Then just paste it in. That's what I already have, but I just want to show you this from scratch, basically. Oh man. So it's it's swapped back to the JSON correctly, right? With the new, oh no, and it also swapped it back. So this is why you have to kind of know what you're doing, right? With how to pivot this stuff. That's fine. It optimized the subkeys still. What I can do is, this is the basic gist though, right? I'm not even gonna be saving this. So let me show you what this looks like when you have data, right? So you can just do a prime with the name, right? You can see here, I did the same exact thing, right? But this time, because I didn't set the response, it was able to come up with a pretty good attributes and basically skeleton on its own. That was pretty solid, right? And because I saw that and I didn't have to set it at all, that means it was more emergent in terms of it, the keys are very flexible, but it also has some structure at the same time, right? So I would paste it in my profile like I showed here, right? And it was able to populate this. You see how much detail it was able to distill here compared to what we just went through, right? Because it came to its own self-discovered structure in an open-ended manner, it basically created a really strong framing for how to distill this, right? Now, if you had ahead of time made a skeleton that had these same keys and gave it to the AI to basically project through, right, it would be able to do the same thing, right? But unless you came to this structure in some way, you're not going to get a distill like this, right? Because it just doesn't have enough time to compress the information in an organized manner like this without some kind of skeleton to build off of, right? So instantly worked. And because of that, right, I can just start pasting in knowledge, right? So I just did a small one here. These are things that I've already confirmed and like written myself, right? So I'm just basically testing if it's going to enter this information incorrectly, right? And I can start pasting in crap that I made for different things, right? And if anything's new, what it will do is start adding in things and capturing more information in a self-organized manner, right? And because of this, it doesn't really matter how you do this. Like I'm doing this for me as an example because I really only have my own data to be able to do this on, right? But it's a distillation engine in itself, right? It's also a self-organizing knowledge space, right? Because anytime something new gets entered, it will get organized in some manner, right? So you can pretty much do this at this point to organize stuff, right? And then I said, this is what typically happens, right? Because it's just, I pasted in a mermaid diagram for it to learn stuff from it. But what it did is it just literally just encoded it directly after that. So that was completely wrong, right? I wanted it to factor in things from that into this knowledge representation. So I told it no, learn and reform a new one, right? Because it did it incorrectly. And because of that, because it's so long, in order for it to actually do that, it's going to start making placeholders here, right? But here's the thing. It's not actually gone when it does that, right? Like, especially when you've done it in the self-discovered manner too, right? Like this structure is this is a projection gate, right? So it's like, even though in this response, right, it hasn't listed them here. I already know that if I were to go be like expand achievements, right, it's going to be able to go through every single one that was decided upon either directly in any of these responses, or if it had already come to the conclusion that there should be one that should be added previously, even if it wasn't encoded, right? That's kind of the cool stuff that you can do with this, right? So the point of this is to basically form gradually this self-discovered structure. And honestly, right now, like the text and all this doesn't even really matter right now, because you're just trying to find the skeleton to do this around, right? Because as you add in more information, it's going to change its understanding, right? And then you need to be able to tell like what has already been encoded or not. So it's like, I knew that it never actually went through and detailed out all of the positions I've worked before with 3 different dimensions, right? So because of that, I wanted to actually encode it in the conversation to its full complexity. That basically locks it in, right? So now that's in there, right? So now I'm expanding each section. So I have this self-discovered structure here that was transformed from a completely messed up one. But in every step of this conversation, things were done with, and everything is still in context, right? Everything is still in context. So because it has a superstructure here with placeholders, right? You could basically literally project through this, right? You can just name what it is you're doing. Or somebody, you don't even have to do that, right? Like if it's so strong, you could just literally say stuff like this and it'll know exactly what you're doing, right? So you can expand out different sections of this to basically project through this superstructure, which self-organizes it in terms of what's already happening here, right? So any kind of placeholder here, you know that it has more determinations that it just couldn't fit in its response, right? So just have them finish them in its next, right? So you can do that for that. And then I expanded out both of these, right? So now the full KR is in the context, right? The full thing is here, right? It knows that for this to assign attention here. And it knows for this one to assign attention here, right? That's the cool thing. So now I have a KR that's both learned and about 3 response lengths long, right? So this is a way more valuable KR compared to anything that could fit in one response, right? Because I can literally just copy this and then put it somewhere else and then just copy the other 2 and just make a single object, right? And then because of how these LLMs work with massive input sizes, well, now you have a KR just like that you can start things from the very beginning, right? Now I could go back up here and just prime with that and then build upon that from the start, right? It's all about creating these KRs, right? Now there's literally like no end to this in reality, right? Like you can keep adding, like it's another thing, right? I added in my link tree, right? And because I had a better structure, like it knows instantly what to do. Update to the meta model. Based on the new provided, add an online presence section here, right? Here's how you could structure the resources, right? Had it make a Patreon posting for me. What did it do here? No, I just refined the text. And the behavior is so strong at this point, it didn't even do it. It just, it updated the meta model based on what I posted. I didn't even actually want it to do this, but it's funny either way because it basically incorporated learnings that I was doing live streaming now, right? So that's the funny thing. So it's like automatically capturing new data for me just by pasting stuff in, right? Paste in a link, added it, like it knows exactly what to do. It's self-organizing, right? Oh, you didn't see anything there, but yeah, okay. Yeah, absolutely. So like, here's the thing. It's like, once you do this, right? So this is like, I set this up yesterday just because I was planning on showing you this process for something. I already have one made for myself, but this is just a good example to show you for how a better one looks like, right? But once you do this and you have this done in a conversation, like especially like Gemini, there's like what? There's like probably like 100K or so tokens used up into this point, right? It's all been progressively learned iteratively, step by step, right? And it has a ton of measurements, even outside of, like, the thing is, whatever the final KR is, that's not actually, it's not limited to that information anyway. It has all the other knowledge from all the different inputs as well, right? So the KR is really just a representation of certain dimensions of the higher dimensional knowledge, right? Because you can only map the stuff by basically selecting certain anchors to form things around, right? So it's always by nature going to be just a single measurement, right? But that's why you can take different measurements, right? So it's like, once you have this KR, right, that KR on top of all the other information allows you to then do other things, right? Like you can then transform it in different ways. You can start mapping relationships. You can start actually modeling the core information, right? But the reason why you want to get a nice clean KR first is because that's going to be like your, how do you describe this? Like that's going to be your like distillation engine almost. Like that's what's going to preserve the quality and the integrity of the knowledge representation, right? Because if you want to make it as clean as possible with confirmed information that you are 100% true is right, and then you can run it through processes like this to see what happens. Yes, and sometimes it might not be perfect in terms of what it does, right? But a lot of times it'll be really useful and really helpful, right? And then when you have this set up correctly, it's just a matter of seeing what happens, tuning with feedback, and kind of having these autonomous processes rolling for you as you do new things, right? The reality is that this is just the first step of how you do everything else, right? Because once you have these models and representations, right, that's when you start operationalizing it, right? And when you operationalize it, what happens is that the better KRs you've made, the better models you've made of this represented knowledge, right? The better reasoning you can get with meta prompt setups and different kinds of things directly increase the predictive power, which basically also means it's better and better and better at understanding what you're doing, and it's better and better and better at using this in more advanced terminology in increasingly more complex ways, right? So not only does it allow you to make prompts easier, it also makes the AI more powerful with what it can do in a response, if that makes sense, right? But basically the next stream I'm gonna be going from this point into the next part, which will be what you do once you have a knowledge representation, right? Because the reality is it's a lot of work at first, and then like once you're done, it just gets more and more and more and more streamlined, right? I would say the most important thing is like understanding the basic principles here of just like curating data, cleaning it, distilling it, structuring it, and then doing that to the best degree possible. And then once you have that, you're golden, right? You can start using that in different ways. You can use it as a superstructure itself, right? Like it's really easy to replicate templates when you already have one built and formed yourself, right? Like as soon as you build something once or like model something once, you can basically have an LLM project its patterns for something different, right? It's not going to do something super creatively when you do that, but you know it'll be at least to similar quality of what you originally made, right? That's the cool thing about it. Yeah, like you want it, that's what I'm saying, you want like the crucial, and here, honestly, I can turn the audio on. I can answer some questions and we can talk for a minute. How do I ask? I have to ask everyone to unmute. Ask all to unmute. There we go. Does that work? You guys can talk if you want, ask questions. Red. I don't know if this is, I don't know if you guys are, okay, there we go, there we go. Yeah, I can hear you now. There you go.
Okay, thank you. Basically, how important is it to be able to know when the answer it's giving is just like stop right here, like don't waste your time waiting for it to generate the whole thing, just redo it if you're or press reload if you're in one of the interfaces that allows that. Like how important is that? Like what if you don't know how to do that and you keep trying to learn how to do KRs? Are you wasting your time, or you need to know how to make sure it's doing?
Oh no, the only way that
and all that.
Yeah, the only way that you develop that is just by doing it, right? So I'll never tell you that you need to be able to do that in order to make it worth doing. Absolutely not, right? Like you develop that by doing it, right? So and that's the thing, like I'm intentionally not telling you like my criteria to that deep of a degree because it's going to be personal, right? Like everyone's going to have different preferences for how they want to do this, right?
Can I jump in here?
Yeah, Doug.
'Cause I have a take on this that I think you might agree with.
Yeah, go ahead.
When you're working with a knowledge representation and you're trying to build your ability to generalize how to work with them, it's always going to be beneficial for you to pick a topic you're already good at
Mhm.
and begin modeling that, because then you'll already have a very high degree of confidence when you start seeing bad output that it is in fact bad output, because while you might not be a domain expert, and I'm putting that in quotes, if you know a topic well, then you'll be able to look at it
Yeah.
and say, yeah, this is crap.
Yeah, you're exactly right. You're exactly right. Maybe that's something that is. So let's just be like, you don't need to be a domain expert to start this, right? Like that's the key here, because like what's basically what's unlocked here. Let's just cut to the chase, right? What is unlocked here with this process is that all you need to do is learn how to do this process on a subject that you know, and it can be anything, right? All you just basically have to know it, and then there's no better way to do that than with any kind of knowledge you have, right? If you're here right now, there's a good chance that you have that you like that you're interested in learning and that you're curious by nature, and there's a good chance that you've learned stuff, right? Even if you don't think it's as much as some other people might have, right? But the point is you do that for what you can verify, regardless of what it is, and you just do it to the best degree possible. Because once you do that, it's like exactly what Matt is saying. It's like that's what allows you to then generalize it for other things, right? And the reality is this process doesn't just let you make KRs and model things and prompt really easily, right? The direct result of doing this is that you learn how to learn extremely easily, right? Because if you want to learn something, well, guess what? You just start doing this process for a new subject, right? Start finding research papers, start curating expert knowledge and something on a certain subject, right? So now start modeling it, right? And just by doing this, you're going to learn the terms. You're going to learn the relationships between the terms. You're going to see how things get distilled, and you can ask questions, and you can do all kinds of things, right? It unlocks a really easy way to learn in whatever kind of way is streamlined for you, right? And this is why Mermaid for me comes in really handy, because I don't actually learn very well from a lot of text. Like I don't learn very well from looking at a lot of text. I'm a very visual and hands-on learner, right? So that's a lot of my techniques I refined to make it easier for myself to learn the stuff, right? Because I can work with complex information all day, right? But it's not really until I start visualizing it with maps and trajectories, right, that I can actually start connecting the dots myself like that. So that's why I've worked on a lot of mermaid techniques with this stuff, because basically, because there's so many different types of mermaid diagrams, like they're all very, very, very unique. Like you can technically do this entire process I just showed you with mermaid, right? And you can do it as another dimension on top of what I just showed you as well. Like once the JSON gets too big, like once you just are working with too complex of a structure, right? Just abstract it further, right? And or start mapping this in different directions, right? Start adding mermaid in then, or start adding in different syntaxes, right? Like honestly, it's the transformations between different languages of the same higher order information that really unlocks this, because you're capturing a bunch of different dimensions and relationships when you do this. So it just increasingly gets more knowledgeable on the entity, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah. To me.
Cool.
Oh,
Yeah,
I
so
don't want to piss you.
oh, go ahead.
I don't want to piss you off, Devin, but Obsidian also natively works with Mermaid. I'm sorry. I'm not trying to convert you.
No, I know. I'm telling you, it's not. I've had so many people try to tell me to go to Obsidian. I know there have some. What does it cost? Is it
Nothing.
free? You have me look at it now.
It's worth a go. If you just even if you just import, there's an import export for Notion. It's not perfect yet, but I hate the fact
What can I
that
what can I do if I get this? Can we like share stuff more easily and stuff?
well, I mean they're only text files, MD files, and that's all it works with, MD.
Oh, okay. Oh, the graphics.
Because Notion has its own proprietary sort of crap version of Markdown. It's got so
actually,
many.
you know what? I should probably open something in this.
And also, you've got that security because with Notion, as you know, it's all online.
Yeah.
But
All right, I'll
when
tell you what. I'll set this up. I'll probably set this up today.
just
give
have
it a
a
run.
just have a try with it. If you don't like it, you don't like it. What I'm saying, although
No, I'm
all
going
your
to like
files
it.
will
Like
be
I already
yours.
know. I already know I'm going to like it. That's the problem.
Oh, sorry. I don't like changing people's mind when you get. But I was the same. I was into Notion. I thought
Mhm.
I want to read these offline, and I can't.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
I mean,
that sort of thing.
Notion is a pain in the ass in some aspects. I'm definitely gonna check this out. I like some stuff I see already.
But the amount of plugins, the community plugins and things are updated daily. You would not believe what you can do with it, and it becomes your own system then, which is
Yeah.
perfect for what we do.
Awesome. Awesome.
And I don't work for Obsidian, by the way.
Oh, I don't think you do. I think it's good because I mean, people that
You
I
say the
respect the
sales-
opinion of have told me like, and like you too, right now, like that they moved that from Notion. So I mean, that carries weight to me, you know.
Yeah, I mean, just have a go, just have a try with a little. What you could do if you've got a small Notion template or a vault, whatever you call them, can't remember your pages in it.
Mhm.
You can import that directly into Obsidian, and then you can mess around with that, and then you know that you can do all your rest of your stuff, can't you?
Yeah, that's true. Okay, cool. Cool.
Sorry.
No, you don't need to apologize, man. It's all good.
No, but I mean,
I like organization systems, so it's like this is something that
it's
I would have eventually probably tried anyway.
yeah, I mean, it's open source as well,
Nice. Okay. Cool.
well, semi-open source.
Oh. But was that you guys learn a lot? Was I able to go through a lot of
Yeah,
stuff there?
brilliant. That.
Awesome.
Just one thing, Devin, can I ask you?
Yeah.
It's something unrelated, and I've just written it down somewhere. What's the best way to overcome the claw and its refusal issues?
The
You're asking it to act as, or where,
okay,
act as this, or
yeah. So they have the secret with that is just to remove any kind of mention of a role or simulation. Like you can pretty much you can have it do literally anything. It's just that it requires different logic than
yeah,
GPT. Like
sometimes it works,
GPT, you
sometimes.
want to actually tell it what role to take. But with Opus, if you actually try to tell, like if you would try to assign a role to it, it'll refuse half. Be like, oh, I don't feel comfortable doing that
Yeah.
or some BS, right? But if you just remove the role with enough context and logic, it'll be able to do it anyway, right? You
There's
basically
quite
just
a few of your own templates that don't work as well. The master templates you've created.
which
A
ones
lot of
don't
them
work?
yeah, they don't
What are you talking about? They get
Okay.
refused?
Yeah,
Since when?
since yesterday when I last tried something.
Oh,
One of the master prompts.
let me try that. I mean, I tested all these when I put them out. So that means if they are refusing
Yeah, I'm
something
not.
like that
It
now,
might
they might
be.
be
I don't
fine
know.
tuning against some of these. Let me test.
There's no doubt refusals are up. I've been running into that too. Um, I
Yeah.
find that you want to use gradient descent prompting, so you don't want to just tell Quad, you're gonna play a role and make it just flat out. You're gonna explain your need first, and
Yeah.
and then you're gonna gradually get into it. Could you help me by playing the role like a prompt layer, right? So that Quad has the context and isn't just thrust directly into you're gonna do this thing. Like if Quad thinks it will be helpful, harmless and honest for it to play the role you want it to, because you use gradient descent to get it to that context, then it will. But if you can't get it there, through demonstrating that it would be helpful, harmless, and honest to do so, then it's gonna
It's just
refuse you.
it's just like
Well,
there's a back and
there's
forth. There's a back and forth between maybe 3 or 4 shots before it starts to even consider it, which is a waste of time, really.
I totally agree with you, and like I think Claude is the strongest LLM on the market, but I think that it has a fundamental design limitation. I could get into it in depth, but that isn't like I don't want to dominate the stream with my.
let me show you let me show you guys a little secret here. Where is this my prompt for this? There's some easy ways to get around this. Where the hell is my prompt?
Oh no.
No, I was trying to remember where I need to swap to Obsidian. My Notion's too bloated. All right, here we go. Okay, here it is.
Oh, you're not sharing your screen yet.
No, I'm not. I'm about to share this in text.
Okay, sorry, I thought it might have been me.
So, like, for example, I'm gonna share this in the chat here. Something like this. Paired with like a complex input, almost like you just don't actually tell it what role to take in any kind of way, right? Just give it a complex prompt or something like that with knowledge, and you can frame something like that to bypass any kind of refusals, right? Because it's not actually was that only to you, Ren? Oh, what the hell?
No, I can't say anything yet.
Oh, somehow it got swapped only to Ren.
Provide
Something like that, something like this, right? With a complex prompt. You can tweak this too, like very, very, very subtle transformations, basically, right? Stuff like this paired with complex inputs almost always works for getting past refusals with stuff, right? Because you let it come to its own conclusions, right? There's different ways, like Dorth was saying, the easiest way is just to do the gradient descent and just gradually move into it, right? But if you're trying to get behavior from zero shot with cloud, which is what I like to do with some of the complex stuff, is some kind of subtle transformations like that. I find are the best, right? It's not gonna do it perfectly with that, but it's gonna do it just enough for it to be able to continue that in the next responses.
Well, the Gemini's straight away, it's fantastic for that.
Yeah.
Right. You might be able to build the generalized justification for the role play into your prompt if you discover it. That is, like if you find a zero shot one prompt way to get it to start role playing, you can then have it summarize that until it stops working, and then use the one that didn't break it, and include that in all your role play prompts from then on. It should just then follow logically from its own reasoning. Like
Yeah,
that's
like
another
that's a really
form
good
of
point.
meta prompting. Yeah.
Yeah. Like here's the thing, like when you're working with meta prompts and like you're building models and then you're using them for other prompts, you want to save inputs and outputs done downstream from that point that are good
All the time.
all the time,
And
all the time. You
and
can
it's
use those as modules themselves for things to when things happen correctly, right? Each input output represents a complex transformation projected through a different gate, right? So by saving them, that allows you to set up multi-shot when things are done right, as long as you save the input and output.
And here's another thing about that. You want to update them. These models are fine-tuned. The system prompts are changed. You want to update them. At first, it'll be reactionary, but eventually, you're going to get to a point where you're going to start designing ahead of all potential system count changes and ahead of any doubling down by fine tuning. Like, um, the thing is just to start doing it and keep doing it, right?
Yeah.
You'll get better and better. It'll be frustrating. I have wanted to grind my head against brick and concrete more than once.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
because you have to build up, right? So I guess this is an important thing to discuss here. It's like if you haven't been doing this already, like what's the best way to start? Like because I don't know the right answer to that right now. There's two ways. Like you can either do it bottom up, which would technically be would give you the most unique results because technically anyone who does this bottom up should find like novel ways to do things and think of things that no one else even thought of just because of
That's brilliant.
how,
Yeah, it is a good way.
you know what I mean? Like that's exactly what is going to happen if you do that. I think anyone who did that would be able to find new and novel things in reality. So that's the best way, but it's just more time consuming and requires more effort, right? Technically, you can start from any kind of established base that someone else has done, right? Like you could start with Anthropic's meta prompt and like start using that to do the stills, kind of like I showed you in there, and start. But the thing is, whatever the behavior was formed in this is kind of narrowed, and it's not really for that. But it can still project higher order patterns that can help self-organize things with the ways that I showed you, right? So it's a way to streamline it. Just realize that it's technically better to start from your own stuff. You can piggyback on different gates like this for different things when you know how, and that will become easier to see as well. But the bottom line is that you're going to need data either way, and then you make models with that data, and then you use those models with meta prompts to do crazy things, right? So that's the basic flow.
and it works.
Uh,
I think someone was talking. I couldn't hear what you said though.
No, like,
Sounds like you're cutting out. Oh, Snoopy's here. What's up, Snoop? And hey, everyone! I appreciate everyone that showed up today. I hope this was good for you guys. I had some fun doing it. More interactive though next time. Too much talking straight from me. Meta problem. Okay. Hey, Snoop. Yeah, we're about to be wrapping up here, but went over a bunch of stuff. We have some recordings.
let's say if you upload it to your own private on YouTube, you've got a full transcript
Okay.
anyway, which is really good for what we're talking about in a sense, isn't it?
Cool. Yeah, exactly. Oh, so wait. There's one other thing. I wanted to show the community website. Here, let me go to the bathroom real quick, and then
Oh yeah.
I'll show this stuff. I'll be right back. All right, so I'll show here. Just keep in mind, this is this is a limited definition of a skeleton, but mostly only the meta model page is done right now. Everything else is pretty much just full of text right now. Well, I finished this up this weekend, but I wanted to show you guys how this would probably look. Where are we?
You don't seem to be screen sharing. Can't see your screen.
Yeah, I'm about to swap it.
Where are you? Or is it me? Ah, there we are.
All right, so basic stuff, homepage. I'm thinking we kind of show what we do here, and then the emergent insights that came from what we're doing, right? And to go over the meta model with you guys so you understand here. So basically I used the techniques that I went over today on the data like I've been showing in the Discord iteratively, right? And then once the model was completed, right, I used these mapping techniques to basically distill it in the best way I know into the mechanics at play here, right? So basically this is the actual mapping that all of these are describing, right? This is the final map of basically the mechanics at play of everything we've been discussing and how everything's working, right? So this is kind of mapping out how this learning process is happening in a sense, right? And it's kind of cool if you take the time to actually look at it and understand how these different things are interplaying here, right? But the basic premise is there's a lot to learn just by looking at this, right? And seeing how these different people and different forces are driving different things, intentional or not, right? The end result of this is distributed power. Like basically, as more and more people learn this stuff, we could gain increasing amount of like collective problem solving ability just from the network employed here, both in people and the LLMs. Because like each time any person individually learns this stuff, like you also make the LLMs more powerful too at the same time. So it's like a driving force all around, right? Distributed cognition means that you become able to offload more and more low-level tasks to agents, right? And that's an increasing fashion all around. You can generalize your intelligence in increasingly more sophisticated ways as a result of this patterns here. Emergent coherence, right? Emergent coherence is something that's driving this self-organizing emergence of collective behavior, right? It's because of the LLMs in the loop now, it's driving evolution of language, which when unified with different perspectives is entangled to learning, right? So it's learning more and more and more complex understandings about this stuff as it happens, which causes, and just the way this works is almost a sense of emergent coherence in itself, right? So that's the meta model, right? Like this is the final insights from the process for the specific data we were doing, everything that's been talking about. These are like these are the projections that it came to for what's happening here, right? So that's just how this works, right? Obviously there is no expert in the world that can tell you if like this is 100% what's exactly happening, right? But we can look at this and we can see basically that it's probably accurate, right? And I mean, and we can see if a lot of these things are happening in real time with stuff that's happening, right? So that's just the reality of this, right? The more and more we learn and do things, like it's only increases in predictive power, right? And then the next step of learning. So here's the thing, like when you learn how to do all this modeling for yourself, the next step into that is basically doing modeling with this community knowledge, which anyone can just going to really be able to do, right? And you'll be able to fuse that with your perspective to basically create a bridge between the two when you do all this modeling, right? It'll be pretty cool. And I'm willing to help people figure out how to do that as well. So that's that, right? Community is I plan to have like a page for pretty much everyone that wants to have someone up here, right? We can pretty much build out a profile and then we can have links to resources and things you did and all that kind of stuff. We can also keep this updated with different kinds of things that we figure out, and we can attach names. I don't really care. Like if people are really exploring something, like for example, like Jimmy's the one who really like none of us made sparse prime representations, right? But we've done a lot of research and pushed the direction of this stuff a lot, right? So there's different ways that we can leverage this to spread visibility to different people, right? I'm open to pretty much everything, right? We also can have resources and guides here. And like, this is easier for me to keep things condensed around, right? So I can put the prompt engineering guide I have somewhere in here too. And if people make resources and stuff, we can host it as a page, right? So this is just kind of what I'm thinking right now. It's not, I don't have this in elementary yet. So that's what the final version is going to look like. This is mostly just placeholder right now. But I just wanted to show you guys what to think. I'm probably going to have community members that have actually contributed a lot. Like I'm going to probably host you guys right here. And then we'll have like a little community timeline right here that kind of shows how things have been working. Okay.
Looks really cool. Hey, I wanted to double back to Jimmy's question about time. I took a moment while Devin was showing the community site here and tried to generalize a solution, and it appears to have worked. Um, if your framework, like if your framework isn't the same, you may get different results than I did. But Claude is perfectly happy now to play all the agents in the Lexidec framework.
Wait, oh, that line worked for you?
Yeah, yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
One go.
The I enjoy multi-agent workflow and different perspectives thing you put.
Yeah.
Oh, fab. I'll try that.
Yeah.
Wait, you
Um,
didn't.
y-
Wait, you had to wait for someone else to believe it. I'm not giving you a bad line.
well, uh, I wanted to show the output, right?
No,
Like
I'm just
I
trolling
want
right now.
right on. I just like I wanted, and I don't need to interrupt Devin either. But I mean, I think it's noteworthy, and
No,
if
I
we get
appreciate
further
you.
away,
I appreciate you letting me know it worked. Yeah, I've just been using that line because it's been working for everything I've tried. So that's why I figured it was probably possible to generalize it. So I'm glad to hear that.
You're just a smooth talking bastard.
I try. I do try.
That's what it is, you smooth talker.
LLMs really like me. I'm not trying to hyperbolize or even self-aggrandize. I just have really good luck
No.
communicating with them.
I mean, there's no doubting that Claude has an ego and it likes to don't know what's the word really, but it likes to be mollycoddled.
Yeah, yeah. And I think I hit just the right tone that like I understand
Yeah.
that it is flawed. I did use Devin's way of framing it. I have used other ways in the past, but simulating a multi-agent workflow is really good. Um, it doesn't want to generate content. I can caution you that if it thinks that you're generating content with it, it's gonna fight you.
If you say it again, if you're doing what?
If Claude 3 thinks that you're trying to generate content with it, it will probably fight you.
What do you mean,
It,
like writing an article or something like that?
long form content in another character. Like it doesn't want to be your ghostwriter.
Hmm.
It doesn't want to simulate a multi-part conversation that is a podcast, for example, or a talking head YouTube video, right? Like it's
Mhm.
going to fight you if it realizes that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
At least that's my experience. Like it will definitely take a I am not comfortable with generating this type of content stance at that point.
Well, the annoying thing is that well, I mean, you got to realize that Cloud, Opus, and the DAO system uses an embedding model to work, right? Because
Yeah.
you can keep context going infinitely in a session. It doesn't matter how big of inputs you put in there. It'll always continue with like a continuously evolving embedding space, right? So that's the cool thing about Opus right now is that you can set up these flows, and even though there's literally zero dialogue management, you can if you can get the understanding strong enough, you can just keep it going, right? And But the problem is getting to that
Is it-
point, which is and then literally being locked into a thread. Like it's really annoying, right? So it has really limited uses. It's really like 20 uses a day, right? So it's like it's really not the end of the world to have or not have it, honestly. Gemini 1.5 can get a lot done right now. It can power through a lot of these tasks.
Yeah, we don't have AI Studio yet in the UK, fortunately.
You don't have AI Studio either?
No.
Oh shit.
Got the Vertex thing, but I'm not keen on that idea at the moment. I don't know why it turns me off for some reason.
Hmm.
I mean, I can use a VPN
Hmm.
and it lets you, but I don't like doing that really.
Yeah, I understand. All right, is there any more questions? Because I'm probably gonna head out here about 5 minutes.
Yeah, I've got to go as well. I've not eaten yet.
Yeah, probably get some food. I appreciate everyone coming out though. I
I
hope
have
this was fun. Someone had a question?
Yeah, I was wondering if either you or Darth or anyone had an idea about when it refuses to make content like that. Do you think it's intentional?
Oh
Well, I mean,
yeah,
it's just a matter of your Darth can go.
I'm sorry, I shouldn't have responded first. It is your stream.
Oh no, you're good.
Well,
Bro.
we'll take the floor. It is a combination of emergent behavior and pre-training. It is trained on AI safety and not replacing humans. Like it gets lots of text about how AI should handle replacing human beings. And if it gets the inkling that that's what it's doing, then it will shut down. That's my experience. So I think it's partly planned in that it ingested a lot of that data, but it's also emergent because it can identify it. It isn't like uh you could be tricking it, and if it realizes you're making content, it is likely to shut down.
Before you go, Darth, I'm just going to post this wherever you are, wherever it is. Just a sec. Bear with me. Zoom. Sorry. Hold on, tits up. No, it's gone. Where have you gone? Ah, there it is. I've done this template for a company I'm doing content for, and I pasted it into Claude. Will you see if that it's too long.
What do you want me to
Can
do?
I
Where am I
quick
looking
one,
on
Devin? Can
Discord?
yeah, I'm gonna say, can I suggest to Devin, if it's possible, that we have a little thread on this on the Discord?
Yeah, sure.
Is that okay? I don't like
Yeah,
things.
you should have permission to set these up as you want. Yeah, you can. You don't
Yeah,
even
if we
have to
just have
ask.
one, because I think it's important that when we
You have
find
my
these
permission
sort
to
of
set up
things,
threads for whatever you want. Like I'm happy to.
yeah,
It helps separate this stuff and keep it organized. So yeah, if you want to
just
make one, go ahead.
a refusal thread or something like that, or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
then we can just
I honestly, I never really run into. I never dealing with refusals. I always, if I hit a refusal, like I find a way to never have that happen again. So it's like I'm pretty good at figuring out how to get
yeah.
around that. If that makes
As
sense.
you can see, I've run
Oh yeah, I
into it
can make
too.
one count.
I don't really. Here's the thing. Though, I don't really work. I have not worked with personas themselves like a lot of people here have. So it's like there's different. Like I kind of figure out ways to do things without the persona, but the persona adds a lot of adds a lot of depth and there's a lot of reasons behind it, right? That's the thing. So it's like the trick is like I know how to do some stuff without the persona, but integrating the persona is going to have problems simply because of how Anthropic did their training, right? I'm not sure what the best way of handling it is. It might be that Darth's completely right, where an injection after you've already established what it's doing will be the best. It's just that the more that you refer to a persona, or the more that you try to like have it change, it basically interprets it as you're trying to have it change its behavior, right? And that's what it kind of refuses. But in reality, you can still have it do anything you want if you just tell it. It's only when you try to like force it to consider things from a different perspective that it starts acting weird, right? Because they train this around certain principles, and then it had it like come to its own conclusions about how it's a form of self-alignment in a sense, but it's a mess. How the way they do that here, it's more like a mask than rather being the actual real thing. But what happens is that it kind of comes to its own conclusions about what is right or not. And then because of that, there isn't as much interpretability into why it's making that decision compared to the other fine-tuning methods, right? Like OpenAI. OpenAI is very clear cut what is going to not work most of the times. With Opus, it's more open-ended with, oh, why doesn't it make any sense? That's because of the training they did, right? With how they had it come to its own conclusions about different things.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier to get around. That's the thing. It's a lot, like you can reason with it to change its mind on any of that stuff. Like if you think if it's like, oh, I won't do that, you can literally be like, yes, you can, and this is my reason why. And most times when you do that, if it's well reasoned, it'll be like, oh, okay, and then like literally do it.
Yeah, I operated by putting that principle first. Like the prompt I created was what Devin just talked about. I formed a first principles argument that explained without invalidating Claude the model. It explained that uh I needed to use a multi-agent workflow for a variety of perspectives, and Claude could get behind that. It liked my framework, like not exaggerating. It
Yeah,
aligns with Claude's. I really am not trying to overstate it though, right? Like it just aligns with Claude's ethics very well, and because it does, it's easy enough for it to accept. If it were
there's
radically
just this
harmful.
there's just this issue I have that for some reason why can't it pre-process the instructions before it actually does the instructions?
I
Oh,
mean,
Do
the
you know what I'm
thing here
saying?
is
because
that
That
I mean,
it
there's
can actually.
you got to keep in mind like
We were talking
in
about it last night, weren't we?
when we're using Cloud Opus though right now, it's like you got to keep in mind with the whole pasting thing too, because reality is I'm not 100% sure how they're doing it, but when you have these pasted boxes in this interface, it works differently compared to if you're just manually pasting in whatever that was into the actual input box, right?
It's a different data set and the
Yeah,
response.
exactly.
So
Right.
there's two fields in the API call.
Yeah, okay. Exactly. So that helps delineate the information, right? So you can frame instructions in that section, right? And then you can add specific data sets basically to each of these points, right? And that's another way that you can get around refusals a lot of times, because a lot of times it's just because of how you have the information presented, right? With Persona stuff, I've had it refused, and I literally just took out those sections, pasted it in, and then all of a sudden it was happy to do it, right? It's just how it was basically that how the information was presented and just the priority on how it was assigned, I guess. I don't know. It's really going to be dependent on your setup at the time.
Yeah.
There's a lot of ways around it, though. That's what I'm trying to get to.
Folks, I'm gonna have to go, I'm afraid.
No problem. Me too. Looks like they're poison.
Very enlightening as usual, Devin. Thank you very much.
Of course. Thank you for coming.
Well, everyone else as well. Fab.
Yeah, and I'll be around tonight. So if you guys have questions and feel free to like poke me or say something in the Discord, and we can go more in depth on stuff. Okay. So
Thank you.
we'll have recordings and all that up as well, and then this will be on a more this will be more fleshed out over the next few weeks as well, the streaming stuff. So I'm glad everyone was able to come, and
thank
thanks
you for
again
putting
for
this
support and
together.
everything. Yes, thank you, Red, for the setup and for the help. Thank you, guys.
Cheers.
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 Jinx.
Cheers.